The call came at 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday in October, and I almost didn't pick up. I had the television on, not watching it, just using the noise to fill the house, and my phone was face down on the kitchen table beside a coffee mug I'd stopped bothering to refill around 2 o'clock. I'd been sitting in that chair since morning, which I'm not proud to admit. My daughter was getting married that day, in a vineyard 40 minutes up the mountain road, with string lights they'd spent 3 weekends hanging from oak trees, with a caterer she'd hired from Portland and a guest list of 212 people. 212 people. And not one of them was me. My name was on the original invitation draft. I know because she showed me, back in January, when the relationship between us was still warm enough that she'd come over on a Sunday and sit at my kitchen table with her binder full of vendor contracts and seating charts and say things like, "Dad, what do you think of sage green for the napkins?" And I'd said sage green sounded lovely. I didn't even know what sage green was. I just said it because the way she asked, nervous and bright at the same time, reminded me of the way she used to ask me if her drawings were good when she was 6 years old. And the answer had always been yes then, so it was yes now. But by April, I wasn't in the binder anymore. By April, she called me on a Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd just come in from the community center where I volunteer on Tuesdays. And she said, in a voice that was already half apologetic and half defensive at once, "Dad, we need to talk about the wedding." And I sat down slowly in this same chair, because I already knew, in the way a father sometimes knows things before they're said out loud, that this conversation was going to cost something. "I think it's better," she said carefully, "if you're not there, in person." I didn't say anything. I let her keep going because I've learned in 63 years that silence is not the same as agreement, but it gives people the room they need to say the whole true thing instead of the polished version. "You know how Marcus feels," she said. Marcus, her fiancé. 29 months into their relationship, and I still felt the name like a small stone in my shoe. "And the thing is, Dad, I just don't want any tension on the day. You know how you can be sometimes." I asked her quietly, "How can I be, sweetheart?" And she said, and I will carry these words for the rest of my life, "You'll embarrass me, Dad. You won't mean to. But you will." I didn't argue. I told her I understood. I told her I loved her. And when we hung up, I sat at this table in the silence of the house and felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as a man making peace with something he cannot change and does not agree with, which is a different thing entirely from acceptance. So that Saturday in October, while my daughter was exchanging vows 40 minutes up a mountain road under oak trees wrapped in string lights she'd spent 3 weekends hanging, I was here, in this chair, with a cold coffee and the television making noise in the background, until the phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Her name on the screen. Her name, which I've said more often in quiet prayers than in any other context, really. Elena. My daughter, Elena Marchetti, who was getting married that day without me. I picked up on the second ring. Her voice was shaking so badly I had to press the phone harder against my ear to make out the words. "Dad." A pause that lasted an eternity. "Dad, the officiant isn't here. He's not. Nobody can reach him, and it's been an hour, and Marcus is. Everyone is just standing there, and I don't know what to. Elena. Dad, I'm sorry. I know what I said, but I don't know what to do, and you're the only." Her voice broke then. A clean, sharp break like a twig. And on the other side of it, she was just my daughter again, without any of the layers the last 6 months had put between us. "Can you come? Can you marry us? Please?" I was already standing. "I'm on my way," I said. "I want to back up because none of what happened that afternoon makes sense without what came before it. And what came before, it goes back a long way. Past Marcus, past the wedding, past the Tuesday phone call in April. It goes back to who I am, which is not who most people assume I am when they look at me. My name is Robert Marchetti. I'm 63 years old. I was born and raised in a small town in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, the third son of a man who fixed engines for a living and a woman who taught second grade for 31 years. I spent 20 years in the United States Army as a chaplain's assistant, and in the last decade of my service I completed the full ordination training that made me a licensed and legally recognized officiant in the state of Oregon and 6 others. I have officiated 34 weddings across my lifetime. not as a hobby, as a calling. And then my wife, Carol, died of a very fast and very merciless cancer 7 years ago, and for reasons I still don't entirely understand, I stopped doing it. I put the credentials in a folder in the filing cabinet beside my desk, and I told myself I'd go back to it when it felt right again, and it never quite did. Most people who know me now, through the community center, through the neighborhood, through Elena's social circle, know me as a quiet, retired man who volunteers on Tuesdays and takes long drives on Sundays and drinks too much coffee. They know I'm Elena's father. They know her mother passed away. They know I keep to myself. They do not know about the 34 weddings. They do not know what I used to do with my hands and my voice. They did not know until that Saturday in October that I was still ordained. If you've ever had a moment where everything you thought was finished turns out to have been waiting for you all along, if you've ever felt that kind of terrifying grace where the door you thought was closed turns out to have been unlocked the whole time, then you already understand something about what I felt driving up that mountain road with my emergency suit jacket thrown over the back seat and my ordination certificate in a manila envelope on the passenger floor. If you've ever loved someone so much that their humiliation of you didn't matter, not even a little, not even at the moment they were asking you to save the exact day they'd built without you, then you know exactly what I felt. Stay with me until the end. This is a long story, but I promise you it matters. And if you're already feeling something, if this is landing somewhere real for you, leave a like on this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this one deserve to be heard, and the people who tell them deserve to know someone is listening. Let me take you back to before all of this. Let me take you to who Elena was, before Marcus, before the wedding, before the Tuesday in April that changed things between us. In the year after Carol died, I rebuilt my routine around ordinary things with the deliberateness of someone learning to walk again after an injury. I made coffee every morning at 6:15. I went to the community center on Tuesdays. I drove to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings in my old Subaru, the dark blue one with the cracked rear bumper I keep meaning to fix. I bought whatever vegetables seemed most colorful, and then ate approximately half of them before they went soft, because cooking for one is a skill I have never fully mastered, and Carol was always the one who made vegetables interesting. I had a dog for the first 2 years, a retriever named Hatch, who Carol had named, and who followed me from room to room as if he understood the architecture of grief. When Hatch died, I didn't get another one. The house felt more honest without the performance of normalcy a dog requires of you. Elena called on Sundays. We talked for an hour or sometimes longer. She was living in Portland by then, working as an event coordinator for a mid-size hospitality company. A job that made complete sense for her, because she has always been the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately begins rearranging it into something better, who thinks in terms of mood and sequence and the way light falls across a tablecloth. She had her mother's eye for beauty and my stubbornness, which is a combination that produces excellent events and sometimes very difficult arguments. She was 27 when she met Marcus Henley. I remember the first time she mentioned him on a Sunday call. Careful, low-key, the deliberate casualness of someone who is feeling something large and not yet ready to give it a name. "I've been spending time with someone," she said. "From work. He's in sales. He's..." A pause. "He's very sure of himself." I remember thinking that could mean almost anything. He came to Thanksgiving that first year. Elena brought him to my house in the valley, a 4-hour drive from Portland, and arrived in the late morning with 2 bottles of wine Marcus had chosen, and a kind of tension around her shoulders that I recognized as the tension of a woman introducing 2 worlds she isn't entirely sure will be compatible. Marcus Henley was tall, well-dressed, and had the handshake of a man who has been told all his life that a firm handshake means something. He called me Sir the first time, and Robert from then on, which is fine. I've never insisted on formality. He complimented the house in a way that was hard to read. "Great bones," he said, looking around the living room I've inhabited for 22 years, as if he were appraising it rather than visiting it. Elena watched me when he said that. I smiled. Dinner was pleasant enough. Marcus talked about his career with the fluency of someone who has practiced summarizing himself, and I listened the way I've always listened, fully, without interrupting, which some people find comfortable and some people find unnerving, He filled silences quickly. That was the first small thing I noticed. He didn't seem to like silences. Not aggressive about it, just restless in them. At one point, Elena mentioned that I'd been in the army, and Marcus laughed, not unkindly, and said, "That explains the posture. I was wondering if you were a Marine or just German." Elena laughed too, but she laughed a half-beat late. I noticed that. I said, "Army Chaplain Corps, 20 years. And left it there, the way I usually do. He seemed mildly surprised but moved on quickly. People usually do. I tried, genuinely, to like him. I held the things I noticed loosely, the way you do when you know your opinion isn't the one that matters most. He was her choice. That meant something real to me. And there were moments, usually when he was talking about something he wasn't performing, like a book he'd read, or a neighborhood he used to live in, where the armor came off briefly, and I caught a glimpse of someone younger and less certain underneath, and I thought, okay, there's a real person in there. Maybe this works. I didn't stop noticing things, though. Christmas that same year, Elena and Marcus drove down together again. There was a moment in the kitchen. I was making pie crust, which is one of 3 things I make competently, when Elena knocked a measuring cup off the counter, and Marcus said from the doorway, without looking up from his phone, "That's the second time today, Elle." It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was just said, as if he were keeping score. And Elena went slightly still for just a moment, and then bent to pick up the cup and said, "Sorry," in a voice pitched slightly lower than usual. I kept rolling out the crust. I didn't say anything then, but I put it down somewhere in the back of my mind, the way you file something you don't yet know what to do with. Easter, the following spring. We'd moved on from the stage of them coming to me and reached the stage of me driving to Portland for visits, which I preferred because it gave me something to do with my Sundays, and because Elena's apartment had a small courtyard where I could have my coffee in the morning without being underfoot. I arrived Friday evening. Dinner that night was takeout from a Thai place Marcus liked. The food was good. The conversation moved through work and news and a friend of theirs who'd bought a house in Bend and wasn't sure about the neighborhood. And then at some point, I've worked backward from the fallout, and I still can't identify exactly what triggered it, Marcus made a comment about Elena's job, something about the hours she kept, and Elena said something mild and slightly defensive in return, and Marcus cut her off, not loudly, but cleanly, the way you turn off a light, and said, "You don't need to explain it to him. He's not going to understand the industry anyway." There was a pause. I looked up from my plate. Not dramatically. Just looked at him with the full attention I rarely give people in social situations and said, "You might be surprised." He looked back at me, held it for a moment, then smiled, the bright, smooth smile he defaulted to when he didn't know what to do with something, and said, "Fair enough, Robert." And that was the end of it, on the surface. But Elena didn't quite meet my eyes for the rest of the evening. The barbecue was July, Marcus's work colleague's house on the east side of Portland, and I was invited. I still don't fully understand why, whether it was Elena's idea or an oversight, and I went because Elena asked me to come and I had no reason to say no that I could name out loud. Marcus spent most of the afternoon in a cluster of colleagues near the grill, the dominant voice in whatever they were talking about, and periodically I noticed him check across the yard to where I was standing with Elena and her friend Priya, who I'd met twice before and who was one of the genuinely good people in Elena's life. At one point he drifted over. "You holding up?" he said to me, with a slight edge of condescension in his voice that I suspect he believed was friendly. "Not too much standing around for you?" I said. "I'm fine, thank you." "Elena says you were in the Army. What did you do? Logistics? Supply chain?" "Chaplain's assistant," I said, "and I was an ordained officiant." He looked mildly amused. "Like weddings?" "Among other things." "Huh." He glanced at Elena with the particular look of a man filing information under the category of things that aren't worth taking seriously. "Interesting hobby." "Ministry," I said, "is not a hobby." And I said it evenly, with no heat in it at all. And that seemed to irritate him more than anything else I could have done, because he didn't have anything to push against. He drifted back to his colleagues. Priya touched my arm and said quietly, "He's like that with everyone who doesn't impress him immediately." I said, "How do you impress him?" She gave me a look that said everything and said nothing. 2 weeks later, Elena came to stay for a weekend without Marcus, which she hadn't done in a while. And on Saturday morning we sat in the courtyard with coffee, and for a long time neither of us spoke. And that was its own kind of conversation. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt that Saturday. It was August. The morning was warm enough by 9 o'clock that I'd already rolled my sleeves up, and I noticed she hadn't. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. At one point she put both hands around her mug, and the sleeve pushed back slightly, and I saw a bruise on the inside of her forearm. Not large. The yellowish green of something a week old. She noticed me see it, and she pulled the sleeve down, and the two of us sat in the quietest silence I have ever known my house to contain. "I fell," she said after a moment. "At the gym." "Okay," I said. "Dad, I heard you. It's not—" She stopped, started again. "Things are complicated right now. With planning the wedding and work. He gets frustrated sometimes. He doesn't mean— Elena." I said her name the way I used to say it when she was young and needed to stop and breathe. And she did stop. And she breathed. I said, "I need you to know that if you ever say the word sunflower to me, I will be there in 40 minutes. Whatever else is happening, whatever the circumstances, sunflower and I come. Do you understand?" She looked at me for a long moment with those dark eyes that have always been too old for whatever age she happened to be, and she said, "Where did that come from?" "From being your father," I said. "Sunflower, promise me." She nodded, very slowly, and she said, "Okay, sunflower." We had a code word between us now. 40 minutes from her apartment in Portland to my house in the valley. I drove that stretch every Sunday. I knew every curve of it. She never used the word. Not that day, not that fall, not through the engagement announcement or the engagement party or the long winter of wedding planning. She threw herself into, with the focused energy of someone who has decided that building something beautiful is the best thing she can do with all the feeling she doesn't know what else to do with. And then April came, and the Tuesday phone call came, and she told me I would embarrass her, and I said, I understood. The months between April and October were the longest I have lived since the year after Carol died. Not because I was idle. I went to the community center on Tuesdays. I drove to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I made coffee at 6:15 every morning. But because, for the first time in a very long while, my Sunday phone calls with Elena were different, shorter, more careful, the kind of conversation two people have when they are both preserving something fragile between them by not pressing on it too hard. She talked about the wedding. I let her. She talked about flowers and the caterer and a seating chart crisis involving Marcus's aunt who wasn't speaking to his uncle. I listened. I told her it sounded beautiful. I told her I was proud of her. I meant both things completely. What I did not tell her was that after our April call, I had gone to my filing cabinet and found the manila folder and sat at my desk for a long time looking at my ordination certificate, which was still valid because I'd kept up the licensing renewal every 2 years out of habit, or maybe out of something else. I don't know. I just held it for a while and then put it back. I also did not tell her that I had watched, through the various social media posts that people Elena's age document everything with, a series of small moments from the wedding preparation that tightened something in my chest each time I saw them. Marcus at the venue walkthrough, standing behind Elena with his hands on her shoulders in the way that could be affection or could be weight. Marcus at the tasting, overriding her choice of dessert with the fluid ease of someone long accustomed to making the final call. Small things. The kinds of things that look fine in a photograph. But I'd spent 20 years as a chaplain's assistant, and part of that work is learning to read the space between what people say and what they mean. And the space between Marcus Henley and my daughter had been teaching me something for 2 years that I did not know how to act on without losing her entirely. So I sat in my chair on October 16th, the day of the wedding, and I watched the live stream they'd set up for distant relatives. Elena had sent me the link in a text that said simply, "In case you want to watch," and I told myself that watching was enough. That my being there in spirit was what mattered. That a father's love doesn't require a seat at the table to be real. The live stream showed a lovely vineyard in the afternoon light. The string lights they'd hung were catching gold in the October sun. 212 chairs were filled with people in their best clothes. The flower arrangements were extraordinary. Elena's eye, clearly not a vendor's suggestion. At 3:30, when the ceremony was supposed to begin, The guests sat. At 3:45, they were still sitting. At 3:50, the camera angle shifted, and I could see Elena at the edge of the frame, near the entrance arch, in her dress. A simple cream-colored dress that was so perfectly her that it hurt to look at. And she was talking to someone urgently, and even through a live stream camera 30 yards away, I could read the tension in her shoulders. At 4:02, my phone rang. I was already standing before I finished the sentence. I was already moving toward the bedroom where my good suit jacket was hanging. Not my very best, but the charcoal one. The one with the good drape that Carol always said made me look like I meant business. I grabbed it. I went to the filing cabinet. I pulled out the manila envelope. I went to the car. 40 minutes up the mountain road. I knew every curve of it. I called Elena back as I pulled out of the driveway. She answered immediately. "I'm coming," I said. "Tell me the layout of the ceremony space." She made a sound that was half a sob and half something like relief. "Dad, are you... Your credentials, are they still current?" I said. "I renewed in March." A long breath. "The arch is at the north end of the lawn. There's a podium, but you don't have to use it. The vows. We wrote our own vows. They're on index cards. Marcus has them. Dad." Another pause. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "Tell me if there's anything else I need to know." She hesitated. "The guests don't know who you are. I mean, some of them do, but most of them just know I have a dad." "That's fine." "Marcus is..." Another hesitation. "He's embarrassed. About the officiant. He's been handling it by trying to manage everything, and I think..." "Elena," I said it gently, "I'll handle Marcus. You just be ready to get married. That's your only job right now." The drive up was October clear, the kind of afternoon where the sky is so blue it seems to be trying to prove something. The road through the mountains was half in shade, the Douglas firs on either side dense and dark, and I drove at a steady speed because arriving quickly and arriving in one piece are both necessary conditions, and I have never confused urgency with recklessness. I called the county clerk's office from the car, not because I needed to, my credentials were solid, but to confirm, for my own peace of mind, that my license was on file in Yamhill County, where the vineyard was located. It was. The clerk sounded mildly puzzled by the inquiry. I thanked her and hung up. I thought about the 34 weddings I'd officiated over 20 years. I thought about the couple who'd cried through the entire ceremony, including the parts that weren't sad. I thought about the outdoor wedding in New Mexico in June where the wind kept trying to take everyone's programs, and the whole crowd was laughing by the time we got to the vows. I thought about Carol sitting in the front row at so many of them, watching me with an expression I could never fully describe, but that I understood meant something along the lines of, "This is who you are, and I'm grateful to know it." I thought about the Sunday morning in the courtyard and the word sunflower. I turned into the vineyard access road at 4:38. The parking area was full. A young man in a vest who was probably a coordinator appeared from behind a van and looked at me with the panicked expression of someone who has been fielding crises all day and just received another variable, and I handed him my car key and said, "I'm the officiant. Take me to the ceremony space." He stared at me. Then he said, "Yes, sir," and took the key. I walked up the gravel path toward the lawn where 212 people were still sitting in their white wooden chairs, and several things happened in rapid sequence. I saw Elena at the edge of the entry arch, and she saw me, and her expression did something complicated, relief and emotion, and something that might have been shame and something else entirely, which I recognized as love, the old and uncomplicated kind. I saw Marcus standing beside her in his tuxedo, looking in my direction with an expression I could not immediately categorize. And I saw that the whole assembled crowd had the focused, slightly restless energy of people who have been waiting a long time for something to begin. And I thought, the thing to do is begin. I walked to the arch. I shook Marcus's hand. He held my hand a beat longer than necessary and said, very quietly, "I didn't know you were still licensed," I said. "I know." I let go of his hand and stepped forward. I turned to face 212 people in their best clothes on a hillside vineyard in October, with string lights in the oak trees and the mountains behind me going gold in the late afternoon sun. And I felt, for the first time in 7 years, the particular stillness that used to come over me when I stood before a congregation. The quiet that is not emptiness, but presence. I said in the voice I spent 20 years building, not loud, but clear, the kind of voice that carries without effort. Good afternoon. My name is Robert. I am Elena's father, and I am also, as it happens, a licensed officiant. So, let's get these two married. There was a beat of complete silence, and then the entire crowd began to applaud. I found out later that a woman in the third row, who was Marcus's colleague from his first job out of college, leaned over to the person beside her and whispered, "Who is that man?" And the person beside her said, "That's her dad." And Marcus's colleague said, "Why didn't he plan to do this from the beginning?" And nobody had an answer to that, which I think is as it should be. Marcus's best man, a broad-shouldered man named Cole, who I'd met exactly once at the engagement party, appeared from somewhere to my left with the index cards held out to me. I thanked him and took a moment to read what Elena and Marcus had written for each other. And I will not share those words here because they were theirs. I'll say only that they were earnest and specific, and that Marcus's vows contained a line I wasn't expecting about learning how to ask for help and how much it cost him, and I understood that the man writing those words was not entirely different from the man who made the comment about the measuring cup in my kitchen. Both things true at once. Two of the vineyard staff, I learned later, had pulled out their phones and were recording the ceremony from the back of the crowd. One of them told Elena afterward that she'd recorded it because she'd been to a lot of events at that venue, and this was the first time the ceremony had made her cry. Elena told me that the following Sunday on our phone call, which was back to an hour and then some, I married my daughter in 27 minutes. I spoke about the covenant of choosing someone, about the courage that love requires, about how two people standing in front of witnesses are doing something fundamentally brave. I said a few things that came from the Army chaplain's training, and a few things that came from being Carol's husband for 26 years, and one or two things that I only knew because I was Elena's father. When I said, "You may kiss your spouse," the crowd was on its feet. Marcus kissed her with a sincerity I had not seen from him before in any context, which I filed away as important data. And Elena, when she turned to face the crowd, Elena, my daughter, in her cream-colored dress under the string lights with the October mountains behind her, was crying. But not the way people cry at weddings from overwhelming happiness. She was crying the way people cry when something that was broken is being repaired, when they feel something they thought they'd lost come back to them. She was looking at me. The reception that followed was, by Elena's design, impeccably organized. I sat at a table near the back with some relatives I'd known for years, and some I barely recognized, and had the pleasant, low-key conversations of a man who was no longer the most interesting topic in the room, which suited me fine. Cole came to find me at one point and sat down with 2 glasses of wine and said, "She never told us you were ordained." I said, "She didn't know I still was, until today." He looked at me for a moment and then said, "Man," and shook his head slowly. That was the whole conversation, but it felt complete. Marcus found me after dinner. He came to the table alone, without the group of his friends he'd been rotating through all evening, and he sat across from me in the chair that had recently been vacated by Elena's aunt. He looked tired and genuine, which was a version of his face I hadn't seen before. "I owe you an apology," he said. I said, "Which one?" A short, surprised exhale that was almost a laugh. "Right. Yeah, multiple." He straightened the base of his wine glass on the tablecloth, a slight nervous gesture. I don't have a great reason for how I've acted. Toward you. That's on me." "I appreciate that," I said. "Tell me what you're going to do about it." He blinked. He seemed to have expected a shorter response. "Not with me," I clarified. "I'm not the one who matters. Tell me what you're going to do differently, for her." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's a therapist. I started going. In August. Elena she knows, but it's been..." He stopped. "I've been working on some things." "Good," I said. "Keep working on them." He nodded. He reached his hand across the table and I shook it. And this time the grip was different. Less performance, more contact. I'm not going to tell you everything was resolved in that handshake. It wasn't. A handshake is an intention, not an outcome, and intentions require a long road of subsequent choices before they amount to anything real. I know this because I have been watching people make and break intentions for 63 years, and because I made more than a few myself that required significant mileage before I could claim to have honored them. But it was a beginning. Beginnings matter. A week after the wedding, I received a call from the Vineyard events manager who had gotten my contact information from Elena. She said they'd had 2 subsequent couples contact them in the week since the wedding, asking if they could hire the officiant who married the Henley wedding and whether he was available for future bookings. I told her I'd think about it. I thought about it for about 4 days, and then I called her back and said yes. The months that followed the wedding were not simple, but they were honest in a way that things between Elena and me had not been honest in a while. Our Sunday calls went back to being long. She told me things she'd been keeping smaller than they were, about the difficulty of the past year, about the fear she'd carried, about the way she'd gotten so deep into protecting Marcus's idea of himself that she'd started to forget she had an idea of herself too. She told me about the therapist they were seeing together now, since October, a couples counselor in Northeast Portland. She said it was the hardest and most necessary thing she'd done in years. I told her I was proud of her. She told me she was sorry about April, about "you'll embarrass me." She said it plainly and without excessive justification, the way you say something you mean. I was afraid of how he'd react if you were there. I made it about me to make it easier to say it wasn't fair. I said, "I know." "Are you angry?" "No," I said, and I meant it. And I meant, I'd been many things in the months between April and October. Sad, worried, quietly furious at moments I didn't give voice to. But sitting here now, in January, with my coffee at 6:15, with Elena calling every Sunday, and a second Saturday booking at the Vineyard already on the calendar, anger seemed like a very small and unnecessary thing to carry. "I want you to know," she said, "that I understand now why you set up the word. Sunflower. What you were watching for." A pause. "I didn't want to see it back then." "You saw it when you needed to." "Is that generous or just true?" "Both," I said. Often the same thing. In February, I officiated a wedding at the Vineyard for a couple named Darren and Sue, late 30s, second marriage for both of them, the particular joy of people who have been through something and come out the other side and are now choosing again with eyes open. Their families combined into a single crowd of about 60 people, and the ceremony was 22 minutes long. And when it was over, Sue's mother came and found me and held my hands in both of hers and said, "You made it feel real. Thank you." That's the thing about officiating that I'd forgotten and then remembered. The ceremony is never really about the words. The words are the frame. What fills the frame is the truth of the 2 people standing in it, and your job is just to hold the frame steady long enough for everyone to see it. Marcus has not become the easiest man to know, but he has become more honest. He and Elena came for dinner in March, and he helped me clear the table afterward without being asked. And at one point in the kitchen, he said, in the offhand tone of someone saying something that costs them something, "She really loves you, you know. Like, it's the center of a lot for her. You." I kept stacking plates. I said, "I know." "That used to make me uncomfortable," he said. "And now?" "Now I think it's probably the most reliable thing about her," he said, "which means it should be something I'm grateful for." I looked at him then, over the counter with its stack of plates between us, and I thought, there is the person I saw briefly under the armor, back at that first Thanksgiving, the one who was younger and less certain, the one still worth meeting. "Keep going to therapy," I said. "I will," he said, and picked up the stack of plates. The whole year has moved like that, in small adjustments, in incremental truths, in the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments that do not photograph well but are in fact the structure of a life. Elena's company gave her a promotion in April. I booked a 3rd wedding at the Vineyard for June. I made it back to the community center on Tuesdays and have started a small conversational group for newly retired men, which is something I didn't know I wanted to do until I started doing it and found that the room fills up every week. In September, a year after the wedding, Elena and Marcus came for the weekend. Saturday morning in the garden, I've started gardening, another thing I didn't know I'd wanted. We were sitting with coffee, the 3 of us, and Elena said, out of nowhere, "Dad, do you ever think about how differently that day could have gone?" I thought about it honestly. Yes. If the officiant had shown up? Probably, yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I think about that too. I think if everything had gone normally, I might have just let things keep going the way they were going and told myself it was fine. She wrapped both hands around her mug. The disaster was the best thing that happened that day. Marcus across the table was looking at the garden with a neutral expression that I've learned over the last year to read as something close to agreement with things he isn't yet able to say aloud. He's getting better at saying them. Slowly. Which is how most real change actually moves. The letter arrived in October, almost exactly a year after the wedding. Not from anyone in the family, from the original officiant, the one who hadn't shown up. His name was Trevor Baxter, and the reason he hadn't appeared was that he'd been in a minor car accident that morning and had been taken to a hospital in Salem, and in the chaos of the day had somehow failed to reach anyone from the wedding party, or had tried and the calls had not gone through. He had apparently felt terrible about it for an entire year. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages, extremely apologetic, and contained the detail that he had watched a video of the ceremony that someone had shared online, and that he wanted Elena and Marcus to know that it was the most beautiful ceremony he had ever seen, and that he was sorry he hadn't been the one to perform it. But perhaps things had worked out as they were supposed to. Elena texted me a photo of the letter with the note, "Universe has opinions, apparently." I wrote back, "Always has. There are things I want you to take from this, if you're still with me, and I believe you are. I want to tell you about strength, because the word gets misused to the point where it barely means anything. People say strong like they mean loud, or strong like they mean untouchable, or strong like they mean the absence of being afraid. None of those are what I've learned strength to be. Strength is not winning the argument. Strength is still picking up the phone when the person who hurt you is calling. Strength is not refusing to feel the wound. Strength is feeling it fully and then making a decision about what you're going to do next. Strength is the Army chaplain's assistant who spent 20 years holding hands with people at the worst moments of their lives, learning that presence is more powerful than any solution, and then had to learn that lesson all over again in his own family. Strength is sitting in a kitchen chair on a Saturday in October with a cold coffee and a live stream, and not calling her, and trusting that she knows the word sunflower, and waiting and waiting and waiting for the phone to ring, and then answering it on the second ring and saying, "I'm on my way." I have officiated 6 weddings since Elena's. Each one teaches me something. The thing they collectively teach me is this: love is not a feeling that resolves. Love is a practice that continues. It goes forward not because it's easy, but because it's chosen, again and again, sometimes in large and ceremonial ways, and sometimes in the small, unglamorous ways, like clearing the table without being asked, or texting a photo of a letter with a note about the universe, or sitting in a garden in September with coffee and saying something true out loud for the first time. I am 63 years old. I live in the same house I've lived in for 22 years. I make coffee at 6:15 every morning. I go to the community center on Tuesdays. I drive to the farmer's market on Saturdays in my old Subaru with the cracked bumper that I'm still meaning to fix. I officiate weddings on the weekends now. I have a booking at the Vineyard next month for a couple I met once over coffee who spent the whole conversation finishing each other's sentences, and I remember thinking, yes, these two. This one's going to be good. Elena calls every Sunday. Sometimes Marcus is there and sometimes it's just her, and both versions are good. I have not fully healed from losing Carol. I don't know if that is something that completes, or if it is simply something that becomes part of the shape of you over enough time. A room in the house you stop trying to change and start learning to live alongside. What I know is that she would have loved that day at the Vineyard. She would have loved watching me walk up that gravel path in my charcoal suit jacket. She would have looked at me from the 3rd row with that expression I could never fully describe, the one that meant, "This is who you are, and I'm grateful to know it." I would have liked to see her there. But she was, in every way that matters. She always is. If you've made it all the way here with me, then you already understand something about what I'm talking about. You felt some version of it. The moment when the person you love doesn't see you, and you have to decide whether to keep showing up anyway. Or maybe you've been the one who didn't see, and you're sitting somewhere right now with the weight of that. Either way, you're not alone in it. That's what I want you to carry out of this. more than anything else. Stories like this one, the ones that are messy and true and don't resolve with a bow, they deserve to be told and they deserve to be heard. If this one reached something in you, leave a like. Leave a comment and tell me what it stirred up. Tell me about the person you've kept showing up for, or the moment you almost didn't pick up the phone. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories coming, and every one of them is about this same stubborn, difficult, irreplaceable thing we call family. And if you remember nothing else from the last hour we've spent together, remember this. Sometimes the day falling apart is the only way it finally comes together.